Okay, welcome to the Jobcast. Giving everyone another minute just to join. Okay, let's get started. So, presenting your authentic self during the job search is often challenging. Let's be honest, I'm showing up differently to an interview than I would lunch with friends, but it can be uniquely difficult if you identify as LGBTQIA. And that's why in today's workshop, we are going to talk about how to find an LGBTQIA plus friendly workplace, tips for being your authentic self during the job search, and how to overcome potential bias in the hiring process. Before I begin, I'll cover a few housekeeping items. First, you're in listen only mode. So you can hear and see us, but we can't hear or see you. And we're recording, but remember, you're not being recorded, just us. The recording will be shared out in a few days. And I'll be posting links to relevant resources in the chat so you can go deeper on specific topics that are of interest to you, but don't feel like you need to be actively clicking on every link if that'll be distracting. All of the links, along with the slides, will be shared via email after the presentation. And finally, we'll be using the Q&A feature in Zoom. So an important note, if you post a question, your name will be shown unless you check the box to send anonymously. So if you don't check that box, your name and questions will be associated and seen publicly during the webinar. And that's because you'll all be able to upvote questions that are posted on Zoom to be answered live. So just give the question a thumbs up and we'll talk through the top voted questions, hitting a couple during the presentation and then more at the end. So stay tuned for that. There are a lot of you watching right now, so please only post questions that would be relevant for others. That's what will get it upvoted and answered. If we don't get to your question at the end, you can post it later as a comment on the YouTube video so our team can respond there. Now, let me introduce our speakers. Holly is a career coach at HackerU, specializing in guiding a diverse demographic of job seekers through the various stages of their job search journey. And Taylor is a senior recruitment evangelist at Indeed, where he consults with national employers, helping them improve recruitment strategies through data, insights, and trends. And that's me, Brandy Warwis. I'm on Indeed's Job Seeker Experience team, and we're responsible for creating helpful resources and events like this Jobcast for our users, like you. Holly, you want to say hello?
Hi, Holly Thompson here, she, her, hers. So glad to talk with you. It looks like we've got a really wide representation from all over the place. So really thrilled to speak with you all today.
And hi, everyone. Brandy, thank you so much for the introduction. It is so good to be here with you on this special edition of Jobcast celebrating Pride Month. So as Brandy said, I am an evangelist with Indeed, which essentially means that I get the opportunity to go out and share Indeed's story and our vision for reimagining job search with some of the biggest companies that you've heard of before. So that's why we felt today would be just a great opportunity to bring some of our knowledge to you so that we can celebrate Pride Month together, but give you some actionable resources to really tee up your candidacy during this time and really representing yourself in an authentic way. It's a very exciting time right now in our country and everything that's going on. There are 11 million folks in the US that already identify as LGBTQIA+. It's about 4.5% of the population. And, these numbers are continuing to increase as more and more people feel comfortable and safe, coming out in the workplace and things like that. We've got some amazing tools at our disposal now, like the HRC Corporate Equality Index, Last we checked, there were around 686 companies that have scored above a 100%. On their index, which means that there are just a growing number of organizations that are really going above and beyond to create an inclusive work environment for people that they can feel safe at and really just show up authentically. So this is definitely something to celebrate. We know that about a fourth of those who do identify as LGBTQIA plus actually tell us that they stay in their job because they feel supported in their inclusive work environment. And so this is great to see. And more organizations are starting to adopt more inclusive practices, because they definitely know, right, that as employees, we spend more time at work than we do at home most often. So, having a place where you can show up authentically and create connections that feel meaningful and feel organic, really, really important. So again, these numbers are continuing to increase as well. And what we want to help you do today is find some of these companies that are, embarking upon some of this work. I can certainly attest that, my time at Indeed has been augmented by our, approach to diversity, inclusion, and belonging, not just for our group, but for other underrepresented groups. And it definitely keeps me at the organization. So let's talk about how we can maybe help you find an organization that, is potentially a better fit, one that is LGBTQIA, plus friendly, in a place that really invites you to be yourself. So the first thing that we always recommend that you do when you are researching, employers is, look for those inclusive Easter eggs, right, on maybe a corporate career site, within social media, or maybe even on an Indeed company page. Glassdoor is another great place to go. But you're going to want to look for things like culture videos, maybe organizations that these companies are supporting. You have the ability to read reviews about what other people have felt has been representative of either a good experience or a bad experience. We now have this is really cool, I think, is something we've done on our company page product is include what we now call work happiness reporting, where you can actually fill out in your Indeed review, right, how inclusive you feel an employer is. So, and this lives right on the snapshot tab when you click into a company on Indeed. So if you're really looking for just kind of like quick information about the inclusive practices that a company is employing, this is going to be a really great place to go. I know that Brandy is going to ping you an article from our job search guide around finding companies that value diversity and inclusion and belonging. But just a couple of places that you can go to really just educate yourself on who the company is, what they believe in, and specifically within diversity, inclusion, and belonging, what they're practicing. Holly, any additional thoughts on maybe some tips on looking for an inclusive employer?
Yeah, absolutely. And Taylor, thank you. I think that's such a great information to give. And I think it's so important to do your research ahead of time so you know what you're getting into. There's also the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce. And they'll list off differently your local cities and different groups that you can be a part of and talk to actual people and see where they're working. Because that networking component and actually talking to people who are working at those companies, that can tell you even more information than simply looking at their website and seeing that kind of legalese writing. But I think this is a really great step in doing your research ahead of time to figure out where you even want to work. Because like Taylor said, you spend so much of your time at work, you want to be somewhere where you're comfortable.
Definitely. And, that actually inspires a thought too. If you're, let's say, looking at Facebook or Instagram as well to see what kind of presence those companies have on those platforms, pay attention too for hashtags that they may be using to describe their culture. Here at Indeed, we use the hashtag inside Indeed to kind of give potential candidates a look into our organization, some of the things that we're working on. And then that hashtag is going to route you to other posts that would be relevant in the same arena. So this falls under what we call an employer brand category. So yeah, I would just encourage you to take a peek at what some of those are for organizations. Even having one at all usually indicates that there is active work being done, in this arena, which is just, a great little earmark, to kind of confirm that this company is embarking upon this work.
Actually, one more thing to add on hashtags is so LinkedIn has a really great way of categorizing information. And so if there's certain hashtags that you look for, like hashtag pride, hashtag LGBTQIA, and then see what companies are posting and using that hashtag, that's another way to find some employers.
Yeah, good call. It's definitely going to be another place where you can go and find similar information and kind of filter right through those hashtags. Thank you, Holly. Something else that we also want you to do too is we also want you to pay attention to things like, in what ways has the company responded by creating more inclusive benefits packages, creating policies that protect employees, and even just support resources, right? So you can see here that some of the things that we might be referring to are, benefit extensions for domestic and same-sex partners, for folks who might be in a transition process. Organizations are now offering really generous medical leave options. Some companies are even providing transitional procedure coverage, which is absolutely incredible to see. Something at Indeed that we have started doing over the last couple of years, which I know of a couple of our colleagues have taken advantage of, which is great. Adoption leave and assistance. Little things like this are gonna make a big difference for a lot of folks. An additional idea also I think would be, you can even ask this maybe in an interview now that I think about it, but maybe even just inquiring about all gendered restrooms, little steps like that I think even just directly and indirectly tell people that thought is being put into the safety and security that anyone can feel in the workplace, regardless of how they identify. Anything else from the team here that we think would be helpful to include here?
I think that's such a great point about asking in the interview process, asking about inclusive restrooms. It's such a small thing that's a big difference and can make all the difference for your time at work. And also, if you're comfortable asking that question and you do ask that, notice the interviewer's body language. How do they feel about that? Are they you're like, oh, that's a great idea if they don't already have something like that. So watch for that body language to see, do they get defensive? What is their body language showing you? And is that giving you a red flag, or does that make you feel confident about what you're asking? So there's a lot of things to look for beyond what they just say.
Yeah, absolutely. True. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And something that, Holly and I had actually been discussing previously is this idea that yes, the employer is interviewing you, but you are also interviewing them. Right. And you can do so in a kind, respectful way, but, inquiring about these things is very appropriate. And, you might even ask for, more, inclusive benefits, like, for example, what sort of mental health resources, do you provide for, for everyone at the organization? So little things like this, they're going to not just speak to our community, but other communities in the workplace as well, which I think could be a really great move.
One other thing I'd add there around inclusive benefits and policies is partnerships. So you can ask or do some digging online to see if the company is partnered with any special groups that promote inclusivity.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's actually a wonderful transition into this slide. So HRC, as I mentioned before, provides this corporate equality index, which is great. And I certainly know that there are a lot of companies out there that partner with them on various initiatives, even outside of that. But for those of you who don't know, so the corporate equality index is a pretty stringent rating system for employers that really dives into all things inclusivity for the LGBTQIA plus community. And so any sort of employer that receives a 100% score on this is essentially an organization that has been dedicated to creating policies that are in support of our community, as well as any other in any other group. So things like just gender identity around sexual orientation, soft medical benefits, internal training options, things like that, that these companies are rated really, really, like I said, stringently on, is going to be a great place for you to go. I know Brandy's going to ping you over a list of those organizations. And then another great organization is like a list of those who actually support the Equality Act. And so the Equality Act is federal legislation that is essentially going to provide the same basic protections for LGBTQIA plus folks as any other under federal law. So we also have a list of the 440 companies that are on this list too. So maybe between HRC and the list of companies that support the Equality Act, maybe that could be a good starting place for you to determine kind of baseline, who can I apply to that I know is going to be supportive of me in this arena? And then maybe from there, I can reverse engineer what openings do they have? Do my skill sets and experience match what they're looking for? And that could be a good way then to kind of know that all the companies on your short list are going to support you in the most foundational of ways. Team, anything else that you want to add in here?
No, I think that's great. And HRC is just a wealth of knowledge and resources. And so I definitely recommend that. I mean, just finding out information that maybe you didn't even consider. So I think that's a great place to start and in your search. And again, just kind of mentioning that the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, because they do have local chapters, and they also will have meetups where you can go and talk to people and see where they're working. So I'm a big proponent of networking and actually talking to people, because I feel like that's such a great way to find out insider information of what it's actually like, and being able to ask someone that you trust about things like those health benefits. But definitely agree with starting with HRC. They're the wonderful wealth of knowledge there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, we want you to look for Pride Month participation as well. Obviously, this is a month to celebrate, and it's important to pay attention to organizations that are actually celebrating right now. You've probably seen online, a lot of organizations that have updated their logos to have rainbow banners and things like that, which is great. But a couple of things that we want to make sure that you include in this part of your research. So for Pride Month in particular, you want to make sure that these companies are participating in local pride parades. To Holly's point, are they donating to local organizations and actually giving time and money, to kind of put their wallet where their mouth is, and things like that. I think it's really important to see in what ways they are actively engaging this month. But we also wanted to just make sure that these companies that you're researching are actively in support of, pride initiatives and things like that all year long. So it doesn't necessarily, just need to be this month. In fact, I would argue that organizations that discontinue any sort of support after this month, they could be participating in rainbow washing, which is essentially just leveraging this month as a way to expand reach to this audience, to promote products and services and things like that. So making sure that that consistency is felt throughout the entire year is going to be really great. It might even be a question that you ask in your interview, in what ways do you support, these initiatives, all year round, and see what your recruiter or, the hiring manager that you're talking to has to say about that.
One thing on that too. I love your terminology on that. And it also depends on what's important to you. So I mean, again, depending on your situation, I'm assuming that health benefits might be more important to you than your company participating in a pride parade or having a little logo. And so that's kind of where that rainbow corporate thing comes in. And so again, like Taylor was saying, putting their money where their mouth is, do they actually follow through and support their employees and all of their employees, not just change a graphic once a month. So again, it's really important to do some research and some digging to find out, do they support you year round?
Yep. And that actually leads us really beautifully into the next point, which is, take note of how they support other diverse groups at the organization as well. So even though, I'm a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, I'm also an ally to a whole plethora of other communities as well that are represented at Indeed. So it's really important to me, even as someone, for example, who does not identify as Black, but actively participates in racial justice initiatives, to see my company responding in that way and speaking to those, types of things as well. My CEO is actively engaged in this work. And that in and of itself is very helpful for me to then, kind of trust my employer even more, even though, they might be speaking to a group that isn't exactly who I identify with. A quick story that I can share with you is my very first interview here at Indeed ever with my director, Carmen. I noticed on one of her profiles that she supported BIG here at Indeed, which is our Black inclusion group. And I asked her about it like almost straight away when we got on the phone, because I shared with her that at my last organization, I started our Pride group. And like the first 10 minutes of our conversation, quite literally just was about diversity and inclusion, what the organization is doing to kind of build that up. And we even laughed about, 10 minutes in, she was like, okay, I actually have some questions to ask you about your experience. But at that point then, right when we did start talking about some of those more formal questions, I kind of just felt like that, like the walls had come down. I felt like I could trust this person, that I could be myself. And it just allowed me to deliver my answers in a more authentic, comfortable way. So, maybe that's another piece of advice I could offer is, as you are researching these organizations, or maybe if you get the name of someone that you're going to be interviewing with, see what groups they might support, even if they're different, right, than one that you belong to, and then maybe begin a conversation about that to see, where the chat could go. Any other thoughts here, team?
I love that last bit because it's all about connection. So I think that's a fantastic. Thanks for sharing your story, Taylor.
Yeah, absolutely. A great example of this is Apple. So if you have an opportunity to go to Apple's corporate career site, their page on Indeed, they do a really great job of speaking to, just every single employee that they have. We do a lot of work with them, in this arena. And so I think that they would be a great example for you to check out. So this is going to then transition us nicely into actual tips that we can offer you to just bring more of your authentic self to not just your job search, but your interview as well. So, one of the first things that we want to just make sure is nice and tight is your resume. But we wanted to have some shine, and we wanted to have some zhuzh to it, I definitely feel like you can be open and expressive on your resume. A lot of resumes that I read are just very stale, very cold, and they don't necessarily have to be that way. So a couple of things here that you can do. So first and foremost, right, use your preferred name, whatever that might be. Holly actually, when we were chatting earlier, made a great point around this. And I think consistency is very important. And so if you have changed your name on, let's say, your resume to a name that you feel more comfortable with, it's your preferred name, just make sure that that's reflected in other platforms as well. So that if a recruiter were using different platforms to learn about you and things like that, it's not confusing to them. So, that could be something important. And then in terms of naming structure itself, I've even seen some people with different names actually phonetically spell out the name in parentheses so that it's easier for the recruiter or the hiring manager to pronounce their name, in addition to pronouns. And so if you were just looking for some clarity there, it's something that we, it's something that we definitely advise on. And we just, at the end of the day, want to make sure that it's a comfortable environment for both you and the person interviewing you. We want your resume to be ATS friendly. So what does this mean? So an ATS stands for Applicant Tracking System. So this is the platform that recruiters will use to organize and manage all of their candidates, likely for a variety of different roles that the company is hiring for. So if you've ever clicked in to apply for a job and then you have to fill out those forms and upload your resume and things like that, you are inside of an ATS. And so we just want to make sure that the resume that you have is formatted in a way that will be conducive to the system reading it appropriately. Brandy's going to send over a link for some templates for you to choose from, just to ensure that you are using a template that is going to be formatted in the correct way. When you're filling out your Indeed resume online, that's going to be automatically formatted for ATS systems, all the different ones that exist. So know that we are doing some of that lifting on your behalf when you're filling out your profile with us. Another great tip that I can offer you is if you have found a job listing, right, that just really speaks to you, it's one that you're really excited about. What I would encourage you to do is pluck descriptive keywords from that job description and then pepper them throughout your resume. Because when you do submit your resume, then at that point, then the ATS is going to match your resume with the job because you have similar keywords that are populating. So if you're looking for a way to kind of be more visible in front of a recruiter, this is going to be a really great way to do that. And then, of course, skills, certifications, any other, maybe niche or specific characteristic that you're bringing to the table, you definitely want to make sure that you're including those. And then, right, community involvement. I think that whether or not it is, an LGBTQIA plus organization, or if it's, just donating your time somewhere, that says a lot about a person and their candidacy. And recruiters love to see this. I was actually just talking to a recruiter at a company yesterday who quite literally said it's one of the very first things that I look for, because empathy is one of our core tenets. And I certainly know that if someone is, actively donating their time or volunteering, that we're just going to automatically have more to talk about. And I can assume that they're going to bring to the table something that is very core to our business. So just some things to think about there.
I think Taylor, you're spot on with all of this, and trying to tailor towards that, towards the job description, and making sure you're showing them that you have the skills necessary to do that position. One other thing I did want to add, because a lot of people try to add a lot of colors and graphics and stuff to get their resume to stand out, but those are some things that can actually be an issue for the applicant tracking system, and it may not parse it correctly. So a better way to stand out is really to tell your story. So when you're with those with your bullet points, we don't want it to read like a job description. Tell us, what did you specifically do in your work experience? What did you do, and what was the impact of your actions? So in you telling us your story, that's what helps you stand out, as opposed to just listing off the day-to-day responsibilities. So I think that's another way to really make your resume shine, is to be specific with your accomplishments, not just the regular day-to-day.
Holly, I have a question for you. So would you recommend writing a resume in the first person, in the third person? Is there any particular way that you feel reads best?
I would say first person, but I leave I out. So I would start with technical career coach with years experience. So I leave out I am and just get right to the point. And with the bullet points, I start with the strong action verb. So instead of saying I managed, I would just start with managed, and then give us a quantity of how many people you're overseeing or how many people you're working with. And then again, going into what you specifically did and what the purpose of your actions were. So you can actually do it in first person, but leave I out.
Got it. And actually what you said, makes me think of, in terms of those action verbs that you would use in those bullet points. I know a good rule of thumb is to make sure that you're using different action verbs for each bullet, because as a little pro tip, because recruiters spend 5 to 8 seconds kind of glancing over a resume just to determine if someone might be an initial fit. One of the things that they do is they will look at those bullet points and just read the first action verb to see if there is an inclusion of managed, leveraged, coached, things like that. Holly, would you agree to that, or is there anything else that in that arena that would be good for these folks to know?
Again, spot on. Because if I see used, created, they all tend to blur together, and I just scan right over them, and I miss the content in there. And so it's really important to change it up, keep my attention, because you're right. When we're looking through a resume, we're scanning, we're looking for the impact of your actions. So definitely change it up. And also for each work experience, if there's 20 bullet points, that's too much. I'm not going to read them all. So we want to be very concise. So I like to think of your resume more like a movie trailer. So we're focusing on the highlights, not telling them the whole movie. So we want to have something to talk about in the interview process. So again, consider those high accomplishments, the highlights, and that's going to intrigue us to want to learn more about you.
I love that movie trailer. I am going to steal that moving forward. We talked about pronouns. Pronouns are super powerful. Especially if you have more of an ambiguous name. My name is Taylor, that could go either way. It's actually very helpful in this case, to just identify your pronouns. You want to make sure that they're included in your email signature, maybe in your Zoom profile, like you see that we have, so that when you're logged into video, it's right there, center and prominent. But as I said before, and Holly, thank you again for bringing this to my attention. Make sure that you're consistent across the board. And I think that then at that point, regardless of where recruiters are going to learn about you, it's very clear. It's going to just, like I said, ease the experience for you and for the recruiter when you actually get into that conversation, process. And then, if you are, if you are, identified in the wrong way, it's okay to politely correct somebody. I certainly know that in the times that's happened to me, I'm very quick to just adjust and make changes there, and it definitely would humanize the conversation. But don't feel like you have to hide if someone is misgendering you. Feel free to correct them if needed. Anything else here that is important to address?
I'm just saying, speaking for myself, I know I'm going to make mistakes, but I want to be corrected because I want to get it right. But I can't fix it if I don't know. And I think just like what Taylor was saying, coming from a place of respect and just politely correcting them, because if this is something that is important to you and you want to be identified correctly, you might have to remind them. Hopefully you don't have to continuously remind them that they're not doing it intentionally. But again, like if I make a mistake, I would like to be corrected so I can get it right and identify you correctly.
Love it. Love it. Wanted to pass along a tip from our Pride group here at Indeed as well. So for any work specific to maybe, a gay-friendly organization, LGBTQI plus, anything in that arena that you want to speak to, right? Example, it could be like the Lesbian Who Tech group, Out and Equal is a great group, Start Out, any sort of organization that you supported in this arena. It's just a great way to include it in your profile or on your resume, right? To almost, just directly kind of showcase some of the work that you've done. As we said, you're interviewing this employer as much as they're interviewing you. And you would just want to make sure that it's a good match for both of you. And honestly, though, in the times that, I've included this information, I've had, hiring managers or recruiters ask me about that, kind of up front. It then allows me to expand upon my experience there, tell a good story or two that is relevant. And then at that point, then, right, you either know if it's a good match or if it's not a good match, based on that. So, our Pride group here at Indeed, heavily encourages this because transparency is going to be very important. But something else to consider as well is right, we want you to feel as comfortable as possible in the interview without needing a megaphone, right? To, shout anything about your personal life that you don't want to be there. But if you do feel comfortable including this, definitely a good way to go. Cover letters. Let's talk cover letters for a minute. So I feel like cover letters, right, they're hit or miss for folks. And so I think something important to recognize is, terribly sorry, 1 second here. Something to kind of keep in mind here around with cover letters is oftentimes they're forgotten about because people think that they're not really needed anymore. But I actually think this is a really great way to add some color and some flair, into your candidacy. So if a cover letter is marked as optional, something that you might, consider is, okay, well, if you really want this job and it's really standing out to you, it could be a great way to stand out. And to Holly's point, if you're just really looking for a great way to tell your story, and use your words to really kind of illustrate who you are, what you care about, and why you're a good fit for the role, I think this is a great way to do that. A couple paragraphs is really all that you need. Certainly nothing longer than 1 page. But if maybe you have, a specific story or anecdote that you want to include, I think that it's a great way to go. Another approach that you could take is if you've identified a company that just really speaks to you, look at their culture tenets, their values, their mission statement, and then again, pull some of that language into your cover letter so that as a recruiter, for example, is reading that, they're going to see familiar language and automatically associate you with being a good match for the organization, or at least inch you closer to that. So I'm a big proponent of cover letters. Certainly, doesn't hurt to include them. And I don't know that it's even necessarily something that you have to do for every single job, but if it's certainly one that you feel really called to, I would say absolutely move forward with that.
Yeah, cover letters can be, everyone has their own ideas about whether you should or you shouldn't. Are they read? Are they not? But I would say that if you, I agree with Taylor, if there's a position or a company where you really want to work, then I would say, yeah, absolutely. Do your research, take the time and tailor that cover letter. Don't send the same cover letter out because it'll be easy to tell that you did kind of like just like a copy and paste or plug in those things and swapping out the company name and the title. It needs to speak to that company. So knowing their core values, knowing their mission and why they should hire you, what makes you a good fit for them and them a good fit for you. So those are going to be the things that really help you stand out. And writing a cover letter could be the difference between getting an interview and not. So again, it depends on how invested are you in wanting that type of a position and working for that company. Because yes, cover letters are time consuming to write. And I agree, you don't necessarily have to write one for every single application, but if it's important to you, it might be worth the time.
Love it. And then when you're actually in the interview, we want you to wear what's comfortable. A good rule of thumb here is, when you're doing your research on a particular company, look to see, right, maybe what people are wearing inside of some of the photos that they post. It's always just, like I said, good rule of thumb to match the culture of the organization. If I were to show up right to an interview at Indeed in a full suit and tie, I would just look out of place because that's right. We're more of a smart casual environment. So just, kind of match, that environment, what feels good to you, but also make sure that you feel represented in your own skin. And that, when you do sit down, make sure it's professional in nature, but again, anything that feels, most comfortable for you so that you feel as though you can deliver, a really authentic, organic, conversation when you're talking to the hiring team.
And another point on that too, because some companies have a very relaxed dress code. So sometimes they may wear a t-shirt and shorts. I don't necessarily recommend doing that for an interview, maybe bump it up just a little bit. So maybe business casual. And then I also know that I saw a commercial that Indeed just put out recently where the main character starts out and trying to pick out what they're going to wear. And I just loved that commercial and that inclusivity of introducing the pronouns as well. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, oh, Brandy just shared it in the chat, just shared that commercial. I thought that was so fantastic and really paving the way in making it a typical practice, a standard practice to ask for a person's pronouns and then getting right into, okay, so let's talk about your skills. So if you haven't seen that commercial, I mean, bravo indeed. I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. We are so proud of that commercial. And you know what? Our CEO kind of surprised us with it when Pride Month kicked off. And I mean, it definitely just like tugs at your heartstrings a little bit. Fun fact, though, about the individual who is featured in that commercial, they were able to pick out all of their own clothes and really provide some creative direction in the commercial spot. And they got to keep all their own clothes and everything. So we really just wanted to give them an opportunity to really kind of, take a stake in the message that we were wanting to put out. So thank you for referencing that, Holly. We absolutely adore that commercial. Let's talk about interview questions. And so if you're ever looking for, maybe some concrete examples of what you can ask, in an interview specific to diversity and inclusion, here's, a list of them. So I'm not going to read through all of them verbatim, but a couple of things to, just really kind of extract from this. So, I think that if one of the first things that I usually always ask in an interview is, talk to me about your ERGs, which stands for Employee Resource Group, or sometimes they were called BRGs, which are Business Resource Groups. Here at Indeed, we call them IRGs, which is an inclusion resource group, but nonetheless, they're resource groups for employees, dedicated to different, underrepresented groups. And so this could be a really great way for your interviewer to kind of articulate, all the work being done in that way. These are very, very popular. But as you can see, some other examples here, right? What are your most important values? Talk to me about how you find your culture to be inclusive, maybe, asking for a personal story or something like that. These are just a couple of ideas for you if you're looking to kind of expand the conversation in an interview to include inclusion and diversity.
And then, of course, asking questions with purpose. Don't ask any questions that you could find the answer to easily online. And so whenever, that's just something I always suggest, is just always ask questions with purpose. What do you really want to know? And I think this is a fantastic list, but also what else do you want to know about the company? Do you want to know about the ability to grow within the company? So again, there's a lot of different types of questions you can ask, but again, asking questions with purpose.
Love it.
All right, so now I get to talk about networking. So this is one of my favorite discussions, especially when it comes to finding work and finding companies where you want to contribute your time and efforts. So the first place I always recommend is talking to your friends, your family, your friends of friends, because these are the people who want to help you. And if they don't know that you're looking for a job, then they don't know how to notify you. They don't know that they should. So always starting with your friends and family first, and then also expanding that network. So as I mentioned before, your friends of friends. So if you're on LinkedIn, that would be your second connections. So maybe you know someone who Indeed, or one of those other from the list of that HRC has of the different companies that got 100% rating. So those are some places where you can search, as well as local LGBTQIA groups. So you could check out Meetup, check out Eventbrite, see what's happening locally. But they also, since COVID hit, there's so many things that are virtual now. You can really explore different events all over the place. And then there's different professional associations depending on what industry you're in. And then as you go to those meetups and you start building rapport with people and you feel more comfortable talking to them and asking them more questions, again, that really pertain to you, especially asking about their LGBTQIA policies. Different online communities, even places like I spend way too much time on Reddit. There's Quora, Team Blind. There's a lot of different places where you can go and ask questions and find out information. And then in seeking referrals, so Taylor spoke a lot about resumes and the applicant tracking system and how to use keywords to try to break through, because I know sometimes when you're applying for jobs, it feels like you're applying into a black hole. You could blast out 100 applications and never hear back, or maybe hear back from one. And that's pretty painful when you spend all that time. So referrals are a great way to try to get around that. So there's that saying, it's all about who you know. And there's a lot of truth in that, because with referrals, that helps get some actual human eyes on your application and on your resume. So your network is crucial when you're job searching. So again, tap into that network, the people that you already know, your friends, your family, and then expand. I know, and for some people, it's maybe, especially for those of us who are introverted, it's a little bit more difficult to put yourself out there. But attending these events, especially if it's an online event, then, and as you feel comfortable, maybe other people are asking questions, then you can start asking questions and making individual connections as well. So you can start small and see how that feels, and then work to expand. It can make a huge difference in your job search. Anything else to add on that? Oh.
No, I think that's great. You hit all the points that I was going to, and I even started. It was actually on LinkedIn. I started a gay professionals group in Chicago, which is where I live. It's grown exponentially over the last couple of years, and it's just a great place for people to come in, share events that are happening. So when you think about that expansion, Holly, like that you were talking about, that would be certainly a place that I would go to see what might be available in my area.
That's awesome. I love that.
Before we move forward, I want to just pause here and see if we can take a question from the Q&A that rose to the top. And we kind of talked about it a little bit, but just to emphasize it, the question is, should you put your pronouns on your resume, and how?
Short answer, in my opinion, is yes. I think that it's great to have your pronouns there. I would do it. I would include it right after your last name, maybe in parentheses. She, hers, him, his, they, them. It's as simple as that. And just make sure, as we said, that if you are going to be doing that on a resume, just carry it over to an online profile, maybe even social media, so that it's just, it's consistent and uniform. But yeah, my short answer is yes.
And while we're comfortable doing that, and I'm happy, I have that on my LinkedIn, I have it on Slack, my company at HackerU, they encourage us to use that. And that's fantastic when you're part of a company that does. But if your company is not, and maybe no one talks about it, or you're not really sure, you're not really comfortable, then you don't have to. So I would say go with what you're comfortable with. So if you're wanting to know if it's okay, I think it absolutely is. But if you're not comfortable with it, then you don't have to.
Definitely. And a couple of ways you can do that on your online resume, like on Indeed, is you can either put your pronouns in the last name spot and put your full name in the first name spot, or just put the pronouns in the area where you would put like a resume summary or objective. That'll show up at the top as part of the header. One other related question I want to hit on before we move forward is, Is there a way to put your preferred name on a resume without coming off too strong or potentially ruining your chances?
Holly, what do you think about that?
I would say go with what's important to you. How do you want to be identified? And if you're concerned with like the legal aspect of it, of your legal name and then your preferred name, I have seen on some resumes, some people will put their legal name first and then their preferred name in parentheses. So that's one way you can go about it. But again, I can't speak for everyone, and so it really depends on your situation and what is important to you and what you're comfortable doing. And so if you want to be addressed by that name, then I would say it's important to have that name on your resume and also on your LinkedIn and other online profiles.
Definitely. And I will just mention that your resume is not a legal document. So you are welcome to use a preferred name, a nickname, anything there. It doesn't have to match your identification. So if you have a different name that you go by, you want to make sure that it's whatever you want the interviewer to refer to you as, essentially.
And one more thing from what Taylor had said before, just be consistent. So that way there's no confusion. Because again, as we were talking about before, recruiters move very quickly, they're scanning through. And so if they click on your LinkedIn link and there's a different name there, and then they could get confused. So again, just consistency. So that way there's no confusion.
Absolutely. Okay, we can keep going.
Still on mute. All right, so moving forward, how to overcome potential bias in the hiring process. So unfortunately, there are biases and they're alive and well, and you may think that you don't have any, but we're actually going to talk a little bit more about biases in just a second. So 46% of LGBTQ workers in the workplace are closeted in the workplace, 46%. And there's a lot of different reasons as to why. So going into that, so here are a few different reasons as to why people are not out at work. So you might identify with one of these, or a few of them, or none of them. I can say for myself in the past, I was afraid of being fired. And I was afraid of being able to move up in certain places. And then I also thought, well, you know what, I guess it's no one's business. So I've kind of gone along on a journey with this. And even if you had asked me like 2 years ago, if I would have done a webinar like this, I probably would have said no, even though I was out at work. I just didn't feel confident and comfortable really getting out there and talking about it. So, but now I'm in a different place in my journey, and that's okay. So wherever you are, that is fine. Whatever it is your choice. It's a personal choice. So if you want to be out at work, great. If you don't, that's fine too. So 20% of LGBTQ Americans have experienced discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity when applying for jobs. And transgender employees and LGBTQ people of color faced a disproportionately higher levels of discrimination. So we still have a lot of work to do. And I think it's important to acknowledge that this is still happening. So while it's not something that I see in my current workplace, and I feel very fortunate for that, it's important to know that this type of discrimination is still happening. And so we do have to be educated, and we have to do our research so that way we can be aware of what's happening, even if it may not be happening to us.
Yeah, something that I'll just add in here really quick is this idea of microaggressions, right? And that also being a form of discrimination. We actually have a pretty robust microaggression training here. And one of the things that stood out to me from that training was, and I don't know if this is just a regional dialect thing because I'm in the Midwest, but hey guys is a very common phrase that would come out of my mouth. But kind of dialing that back, not everyone I'm talking to is male. So I try to be much more more mindful now about, hello everyone, hello friends even, but hey guys is something that I'm actively trying to kind of reverse for myself because I just caught myself doing it, but that would be considered a microaggression. So, little things like that could make a big difference as well.
I'm so glad that you said that, because that's something that even I'm working on, and people have pointed it out that I say certain things like, hey guys, or dude. I have a tendency to call everyone dude. And so just being aware of it. And I didn't even realize that that was a microaggression. And so just being open to getting that feedback, learning, and trying to do better. So we can all try a little bit to do better. All right, and so now getting into biases. So it's important to be aware of biases that other people might have, as well as biases that we might have ourselves, just to be aware of that type of discrimination that might be happening. So when it comes to an unconscious bias, so this operates outside of a person's awareness. So it's something that usually happens very quickly. It could just be a very quick assumption. So for the fact that if someone says, oh, my son's teacher said this, and just assuming that the teacher was a woman. So that's an unconscious bias, just that quick assumption. And we all tend to have them, and it comes usually from childhood, and it's been something that we've been taught, and it's just in the back of our head. It's unconscious. And then we have a systemic bias, which it's an intentional bias. It's driven by how a process was, or an institution was designed. So it was actually designed to have a bias and work against a certain group of people. Now, an affinity bias, so this can sometimes be actually a positive type of bias, but it's still a bias, the tendency to get along with others who are like us in appearance, beliefs, and background. So for example, let's say I'm a recruiter and I'm hiring for a position, and I see someone went to the same university as me. And I think automatically, oh, this person's going to be great because we went to the same university. So that would be an affinity bias. So is it true? No, I don't know. It could be, but that's a part of a bias. And then we have the conformity bias, the tendency people have to behave like those around them rather than using their own personal judgment. So this is more like peer pressure. So it might be something that you're getting involved with, even though you wouldn't normally do it on your own, but because you're around your friends, you feel kind of pressured into doing that. And then we have confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out information that supports existing views. So I know this is very heavy, especially in politics. We want to feel like we're correct. And so we'll look to try and find information, whether it's true or not, to make us feel that, oh, yes, my point of view is correct. So that's that confirmation bias, confirming that what we think must be true. Okay, so in preparing responses to control the narrative. So hopefully when you go into an interview, you won't be asked inappropriate questions, but it's good to be prepared just in case. Now, as Taylor has said multiple times, you are interviewing them just as much as they are interviewing you. So if they are asking inappropriate questions intentionally and just consistently doing that and asking inappropriate questions, you can end that interview. If you're uncomfortable and it doesn't feel like a safe place, you can thank them for their time and leave. You do not have to stay in that interview for the full time if you do not feel comfortable. Now, there are some other things you can do. Again, maybe this is an unconscious bias that they have and they're asking a question that's not really relevant for the position. And so these are some questions that you can ask to get things back on track and focus on the skills that you have and why you would be a good fit for that role. So just kind of looking through these, again, I think that these are good responses to help control that narrative and get things back on track. But one more time, if you don't feel comfortable, you can end that interview. Anything else to add on that, Taylor?
No, I think that captures it beautifully.
All right, so I know we talked a lot about doing research before even applying for positions. And again, I think that's looking for a zero tolerance policy is part of that research. So if you are in a position and, maybe the company says that you are protected, they're equal employment opportunity employer, and you feel that you're protected, but maybe there's some people on your team that really aren't abiding by that. And you are facing harassment at work, or you're being bullied or picked on for whatever reason and singled out, and you don't feel safe. So you can always go to HR, and it depends. So if they have a zero tolerance policy, then they should back you up 100%. If they don't have that zero tolerance policy, then it could get kind of nasty, and having to get other people involved in that may not be a fight that you want to fight. So again, doing your research ahead of time to find those companies that don't have a tolerance for that type of harassment. So again, really as much research as you can do, whether through its social media, HRC, talking to people, doing that research ahead of time can save a whole lot of frustrations and heartache.
All right.
And yeah, so for more help and resources related to inclusion in the workplace, check out indeed.com/empathy at work. And you can also learn more about diversity, inclusion, and belonging at Indeed by visiting inside.indeed.jobs/inclusion. So thank you, Holly and Taylor. I know only have a few minutes, but maybe we can fit in several questions here. As a reminder for everyone, the recording of this workshop will be shared with you in a few days, and all of the links that I've put in the chat will be shared again after the workshop along with the slides. And if we don't get to your question today, remember to post it later as a comment on the YouTube video we send out so our team can respond there. So let's jump in. So the next question here is, how do you address companies or jobs that use inclusive advertising but are not inclusive in their policies and practices? So that's that performative measures we kind of discussed earlier. Anything to add there, Taylor?
I mean, I would say if you can concretely, right, say that you know a company is more performative in this arena, I mean, I would put them on my own little list and I would just then steer clear. For me personally, if I found out that an employer is acting in this way, that actually influences my like consumer behavior as well. So, I mean, I would just say, if it is something that you know for a fact is happening, or you have read reviews about this type of a thing, I would just make sure that you are noting that for yourself, and then looking, maybe using that as a benchmark for other companies, and just to make sure that they aren't doing the same thing. Holly, is there anything else here that you want to add? And I mean, I think maybe mine is a little bit more like, okay, noted. I will put this down on the do not proceed list.
And so is this a place where this person is already working there at this company? Was that what that?
Either they didn't
Okay.
specify.
Well, so if that's a place where you're already working, and again, kind of depending on you and your comfort level, it could be something that you bring up to HR and, bringing forth that evidence of, hey, here's what we're doing and here's the reality of it. So what can we do to be more inclusive? But not everyone wants to be a crusader. Not everyone wants to get, a possible target on their back for bringing up that point. So if this is a place where you're already working, if it's making you feel uncomfortable and you're not really happy in your workplace because of this, then I would say it's time to start your job search and look for other places that actually, walk the walk, and they are more inclusive. And then much like what Taylor said, so if you're finding that out, I would put that on my do not call list.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'd also add there, because there's another question that's related that mentions places that use their more visibly queer employees to prove their inclusiveness when in reality the policies or procedures aren't supportive. I think that that's something you can, if you are working there or you're really interested in working there, it's something that you can bring up to the your HR person when you're there and say, I see that you're trying to take steps to be more inclusive. I'd love to help push that forward if that is something that you're interested in doing, maybe by starting one of those employee resource groups or something like that. So acknowledging that they're trying to be inclusive, but not really walking the walk, and helping them to do so.
That's great language. I really like how you present that.
Yeah, same.
Another question we have here is, so I have only one mention of LGBT history as an interest in the final section of my resume. That's my current safety level. Am I being too timid? So I guess how to put involvement or interest in LGBT specific topics on your resume or job search materials. Any thoughts, Holly?
It's such a personal choice. And, again, and everyone is in their own place. Again, there's almost 50% are not even out at work. And so again, it's totally up to you. So if you want to put that on there and be like, yeah, this is who I am and I'm comfortable with that, then by all means do that. And I know from one of the previous slides when they said, I don't want to mess with companies who don't want me because of that. And so that's a deal breaker to that job seeker. If that's something that you can do, then fantastic. But I know not everyone is that fortunate. So sometimes people have to go a little bit more on the conservative side if you need a job and you're concerned about being out at work. And again, it's a very personal choice. It's your information, it is your life, and you get to choose who you share that with. So if you're comfortable putting that on your resume, then I say do it.
Yeah, the only other thing that I'll add there, right, is as much as you may feel timid, right, because you don't want it to work against you, but it actually very well might work for you. So, right, if you've identified companies that are very outspoken about their inclusive practices, maybe they have really, maybe they've posted a lot of photos on their social media accounts of them walking in pride parades and things like that. If you can see that there is, right, active activity there, I think then at that point, then, right, you should feel safer in knowing that, actually by proclaiming that this is something that you're also a part of or interested in, I think that it could only help you.
Yeah, and if there's not a clear way to do so on your resume because you're not involved in any groups or something like that, that is another way that you can use your cover letter, especially if the company does value diversity and inclusion. You can mention, instead of saying, this is something I care about and like, that's it, you can say, I noticed that this is something that you value and it really resonates with me. So using it as a way to connect with the company or employer while also showing that it's important to you. So I think that is all the time we have. But if you found this to be helpful, check out our other jobcasts at indeed.com/jobcast and follow Indeed on social media. Thank you so much for tuning in. Happy Pride Month and best of luck in your job search.